Most people don't realize they're being emotionally manipulated until it's far too late. That's the terrifying thing about it. Emotional manipulation doesn't walk in through the front door. It seeps in like gas, odorless, silent, and invisible. You only notice something's wrong when you're already lightheaded, confused, and stumbling around in circles trying to justify the pain you're in. What makes this so dangerous is that it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like guilt, like obligation, like love, like sacrifice. You'll believe you're being kind, loyal, or forgiving, while someone else quietly rearranges the boundaries of your soul. And that's what this is really about. It's not about bad people doing bad things. It's about how easily we lose ourselves in the name of connection, how quietly we let someone else rewrite the story of who we are. You won't even notice it at first. It starts with a small compromise, a skipped boundary, a swallowed truth. You bite your tongue just to keep the peace. You tell yourself it's not worth the argument, that it's no big deal, but it is a big deal. You won't even notice it at first. It starts with a small compromise, a skipped boundary, a swallowed truth. You bite your tongue just to keep the peace. You tell yourself it's not worth the argument. Because that's the first crack in your inner foundation. And cracks don't stay small. Not when you keep pretending they aren't there. The problem is, manipulators don't need to raise their voice or break a promise. The really dangerous ones don't shout at all. They whisper. They play the victim. They turn your empathy against you. They paint themselves as fragile so that any time you stand your ground, you feel like the villain. They make you question yourself. Was I too harsh? Did I overreact? Am I being selfish? And once that doubt takes root, they don't need to control you. You'll do it to yourself. You'll carry their emotions like they're your own. You'll walk on eggshells, regulate your tone, censor your thoughts, not for your own well-being, but to avoid making them uncomfortable. Over time, you forget how to be fully yourself. You become a version of you that exists only in relation to them, a character in their story, a buffer for their emotions, a sponge for their chaos. And here's the hard truth. Some people don't want connection. They want control. And they'll dress it up as love, as care, as concern. But underneath it all is a deep need to dominate the emotional tone of every relationship they enter. They don't want you to be free. They want you to orbit them. They'll say, "You've changed," when you finally assert yourself. "You're not the same person I fell in love with." And they're right, because you've grown tired of bending yourself into a shape that fits their comfort zone. What they're really saying is, "I liked you better when you didn't challenge me, when you made me feel powerful, when you were easier to control." And that's why this kind of manipulation is so damaging. It doesn't just take your peace, it takes your sense of self. You start to think love means suffering, that boundaries are selfish, that being good means being silent. But none of that is true. Love doesn't require you to shrink. Respect doesn't come from appeasement. And peace doesn't come from walking on eggshells. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to hand that over to someone else, no matter how much they guilt you for it. Now, let's be clear. Not everyone who manipulates is malicious. Some people learned manipulation as a way to survive. As children, they didn't get their needs met directly, so they found ways to get them met indirectly, through guilt, through withdrawal, through emotional games. They're not always aware they're doing it, but that doesn't make it harmless, because the result is the same. You end up emotionally entangled in someone else's unresolved wounds. And no amount of love, patience, or sacrifice will heal wounds that aren't being owned. You can't save someone who's using you as their bandage, and it's not your job to try. The deeper danger is that when you spend too long around manipulation, it starts to feel like normal. You start calling dysfunction passion. You call unpredictability chemistry. You confuse anxiety with excitement. You mistake silence for peace. You get so used to the emotional chaos that you feel uncomfortable in genuine calm. You find reasons to doubt people who treat you with respect. You sabotage stability because your nervous system is addicted to crisis. This is the invisible trauma manipulation leaves behind, a reprogrammed sense of what's safe, what's real, what's love. And that's why healing requires more than just leaving the manipulator. It requires finding your way back to yourself. You have to unlearn the guilt. You have to rebuild the boundaries. You have to give yourself permission to take up space, to say no, to not explain yourself every time someone feels disappointed. You are not responsible for regulating another adult's emotions. You are not selfish for having limits. You are not cruel for protecting your peace. Let that sink in. Because manipulation only thrives where there is confusion. Once you see it clearly, once you name it, the spell breaks. You stop reacting. You start choosing. And that's where your power is. Not in controlling others, but in reclaiming yourself. The real journey isn't escaping toxic people. It's recognizing the parts of you that allowed them in. The fear of abandonment. The need for approval. The belief that your worth depends on how useful you are to others. None of that is true. You don't exist to manage other people's discomfort. You don't have to lose yourself to be loved. Healthy love doesn't ask you to abandon your truth. It doesn't demand emotional servitude. It doesn't turn your empathy into a weapon against you. And when you start to heal, really heal, you'll notice something strange. You'll become less tolerant of chaos. Less drawn to people who need fixing, less willing to trade your peace for proximity. That's not cold, that's clarity. And from that clarity, something incredible happens. You begin to attract people who honor your boundaries, who respect your no, who don't flinch when you speak your truth. Because you've stopped making yourself small, you've stopped dimming your light to soothe someone else's shadows. Emotional manipulation is subtle, but your awareness is stronger. Your integrity is stronger. Your self-respect is stronger. You don't need to fight to prove your worth. You just need to remember it. And once you do, once you stop mistaking manipulation for love, you'll finally be free. Not just from them, but from the need to betray yourself ever again. What's often missed in all of this is the fact that manipulation isn't just a tactic. It's a worldview. It's not simply about someone wanting something from you. It's about someone who sees the world as a place where others are tools, where feelings are liabilities to be exploited, and where control is a kind of nourishment for the soul. A person operating in this mode doesn't see your boundaries as sacred. They see them as puzzles to be solved, obstacles to be overcome. They test you, inch by inch, to see how much you'll bend. And what's terrifying is how easily this behavior becomes normalized, how quickly we rationalize it, how subtly we adapt to it, until one day we find ourselves asking permission to be ourselves. There's a kind of quiet erasure that happens. You don't notice it at first. It begins with small concessions. You laugh at a joke that wasn't funny. You say yes when your whole body was screaming no. You explain yourself for the 100th time, hoping that maybe this time they'll understand. But they don't, and they won't, because the point was never understanding. The point was compliance. Many people think manipulation is about being shouted at or coerced in dramatic ways. But the most dangerous manipulators don't raise their voices. They smile, they listen, they make you feel seen until you're so entangled in their approval that you forget how to stand on your own. These people don't force, they seduce. They create a world where your worth is conditional, where your value must be proven again and again through submission, silence, and sacrifice. And once you're caught in that web, it's incredibly hard to untangle yourself, because the damage doesn't just occur on the outside, it infiltrates the mind. You begin to question your own instincts. You start to view your discomfort as a flaw. You wonder whether the pain you're feeling is a sign of your weakness, not their malice. This is the heart of psychological danger. It's not just what's done to you, it's what you begin to do to yourself. Carl Jung warned of this process. He spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or remain unaware of. But what he also knew was that relationships can become battlegrounds for the shadow. What we refuse to own in ourselves, we project onto others. And what others refuse to face in themselves, they'll offload onto us. Manipulators are often people who are at war with their own shadow. Instead of integrating their pain, their insecurity, their fear, they mask it. And in doing so, they create illusions. Illusions of superiority, illusions of innocence, illusions of righteousness. And those illusions become prisons, not just for them, but for us. One of the great dangers of manipulation is that it fragments the self. It splits you into parts. The part that wants to stay and the part that wants to flee. The part that sees through the lie and the part that still wants to believe in the fantasy. This inner war is exhausting, and that's the point. Exhausted people are easier to control. Tired minds don't fight back. Weakened spirits don't rebel. So the manipulator doesn't need to use force. All they need is time and silence. Because silence is how the infection spreads. When you don't speak up, when you don't draw the line, when you don't name what's happening, you give it room to grow. Manipulation thrives in ambiguity, in polite half-truths, in unspoken discomforts, in the spaces where honesty should live but doesn't. That's why reclaiming your voice is often the first step toward freedom. Not shouting, not fighting, but naming. Naming what you see. Naming what you feel. Naming what you won't tolerate. But that takes courage, because naming the truth often means breaking the spell. And spells are seductive. They tell us we're loved, that we're safe, that we're special. To walk away from that is to risk loneliness. It's to risk being misunderstood. It's to risk becoming the villain in someone else's story. But here's the paradox. Every time you protect someone else's comfort at the expense of your integrity, you abandon yourself. And self-abandonment is a slow death. It doesn't kill you all at once. It chips away at you. A little here, a little there, until there's almost nothing left but a mask you wear to survive. And that's the real tragedy. Not just the manipulation itself, but the loss of self that it causes, the erosion of truth, the suppression of the soul. We were not made to live like this. We were not born to be puppets on strings, dancing for someone else's peace of mind. We were born to stand rooted in who we are. We were born to see clearly, to speak boldly, to live fully, and yet, so many never do. Because waking up from manipulation doesn't just take strength, it takes grief. Grief for the time lost, grief for the love you thought was real, grief for the versions of you that had to be silenced just to survive. But grief is holy. It's not a weakness, it's a cleansing, a return, a resurrection. To grieve what you lost is to reclaim what was stolen. This is why healing from manipulation is not just a psychological process, it's a spiritual one. It's a rebirth. It's the slow, steady unlearning of lies, the peeling back of layers until what remains is raw and real and unshakable. And you won't find that in a quick fix. You won't find it in a quote or a book or a temporary high. You'll find it in the silence, in the stillness, in the moments when you stop looking for permission and start listening to yourself again. Because beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, your intuition never left you. It was just buried, covered up by someone else's voice. But it's still there, waiting, watching, whispering. And when you finally listen, really listen, you'll realize something extraordinary. You were never powerless. You were conditioned to believe you were. You were trained to suppress your truth to make others comfortable. You were taught that love was something to earn. You were told that your needs were too much. But none of that was ever true. That was their wound speaking, not your worth. And once you see that, really see it, something shifts. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop arguing with people who refuse to understand you. You stop explaining yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. And you start living. Not from fear, not from shame, but from truth. And that truth is fierce. It's not polite. It doesn't play small. It doesn't shrink for anyone. It says, I am here, I am whole, and I will not be moved. The world may not celebrate that. In fact, it may resist it. But that's okay, because you weren't born to be celebrated. You were born to be real. And reality is messy. It's inconvenient. It makes people uncomfortable, but it also liberates. And if there's one thing this world needs more of, it's people who are free. Not just externally, but internally. People who've faced the darkness and live to tell the truth. People who don't need to manipulate because they've made peace with who they are. People who don't run from pain, but who allow it to transform them. People who no longer seek control because they've found their center. This is the kind of strength that doesn't come from dominance, but from depth. But here's what most people don't see. This kind of manipulation doesn't always need a narcissist or a sociopath to drive it. Sometimes it happens between two people who are both wounded, people who are simply unaware of the games their unconscious minds are playing. That's what makes it so hard to detect, and even harder to untangle. When two damaged psyches come together, it doesn't always end in mutual healing. More often than not, it leads to a quiet war of projections, subtle punishments, and buried wounds being reopened again and again. In these relationships, there's often an unwritten rule. Don't touch my wound, and I won't touch yours. But eventually, someone does. And when that happens, the unconscious retaliates. Not with overt violence, but with withdrawal, guilt, silence, or even sudden affection. Anything to regain psychological control without facing the truth. You start to feel like you're crazy for bringing things up. You start apologizing for having needs. And that's how the soul begins to starve. There's no villain here, only wounded children dressed as adults, unconsciously recreating the same pain they never resolved. But understanding that doesn't mean you tolerate it. Compassion is not permission. You can love someone deeply and still walk away if your soul is being slowly dismantled. Because staying in that kind of dynamic is like trying to heal inside a house that keeps collapsing on top of you. Most people confuse familiarity with safety. If something reminds them of home, even if that home was chaotic, they assume it must be love. But it's not love. It's repetition. It's the unconscious trying to master what was never resolved. That's why people keep falling for the same type of partner over and over again. It's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. And until that pattern is seen for what it is, it will keep repeating itself, louder, more painfully, each time. The unconscious doesn't want comfort. It wants resolution. And it will keep dragging you back into the same hell until you finally wake up. That's why people feel drawn to those who trigger them. Because on some level, their psyche believes that maybe this time they can fix what was broken. But that's not healing. That's reenactment. Healing happens when you choose differently, when you become aware of the pull and refuse to follow it. It's not easy. Choosing healing means walking away from what's familiar. It means standing in silence while your unconscious screams at you to go back. It means sitting with unbearable loneliness instead of chasing false connection. But that's the only way to rewire the psyche. You have to break the spell. You have to confront the parts of yourself that were conditioned to see pain as love, chaos as passion, silence as safety. And let's be clear, this isn't about blaming others. It's not about labeling every ex as toxic or every argument as abuse. It's about discernment. It's about recognizing when your emotional needs are being twisted into weapons, when your vulnerabilities are being used as leverage, when your empathy is being milked until you forget how to feel for yourself. You can't do that if you're constantly trying to see the best in everyone. Sometimes what you need to see is exactly what someone is showing you. Not what you wish they were, not what they could become, but what they are. If someone consistently leaves you confused, hurt, drained, that's not love. That's psychological erosion. And no amount of understanding their trauma will fix that if they're not willing to do the work, and so must we. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your experiences and reflections. And if this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe. It's important, much more than you imagine. And trust me, the journey we're on together is just getting started. The next videos are going to go even deeper, so stick around. You won't want to miss what's coming next. See you soon.